1:30 and we will commence our program for the afternoon. We're going to be getting into what is Nucleus, what is Brotherhood, what is healing. As we said before, this conference is a working conference, and it has to do with the production of the Philadelphia Declaration. Our two presidents will explain that for the next few minutes. Gene, who do you want to go first? Herman? Herman? Yeah. Okay.
Well, as you have seen in the program, we want to build a Philadelphia Declaration. And that idea is not new, because we did it already in Naide Declaration. And the idea is to set up a type of clear statements. What are our purposes? What like ITC to be? What is the, let's say, the way we will work together? And this subject, what we have this conference, is quite an important one from a Theosophical point of view, but also, I think, for ITC itself. So what we like to do, and that is the moment for exchanging with you on this moment, so that we can build up something over the coming 3 days, that we will build a Philadelphia Declaration on Saturday in the afternoon, so that we are able to extend our Naide Declaration or to extend our purposes. And if you look in the program, you will find them both over there, the purposes and the Naide Declaration. But on the other hand, it is also this opportunity for you as a member to give us some hints, ideas, what we should be. And that is a dialogue what we really like to have with you. So every session what is coming and what is start after this, we get components out of particular presentations and the study groups, and we like to have the components together, and then we will draft something by it. So, is this process clear to you? Do you have questions about it? Do you like comment, or do you have already some ideas in what the ITC has to be in the coming period? I try to address in my presentation that we, and that is really my feeling, that we are all a little bit on a type of transition period. We know each other now for a couple of years. We try to speak over the fences and over the different traditions. And this is something what I have to go on. And my idea in my presentation was, if you realized the 4 steps from belief up to understanding, and you realize that we all sitting in different phases on different subjects, then maybe we have a better way to exchange with each other. Because the exchange is something what is very valuable. Yesterday we had a very long board session. I think we run from 1:30 till 10 in the evening, and then the people kick us out. And but then we had only done 7 of the 13 points. So I think we need another day or something like that. Yeah, and that was all based on the fact, how can we cope with each other? How can we bring Theosophy out to this world? So maybe you can help us in this.
And please don't mistake the idea of a declaration as a must-do in terms of these are things that you have to follow. This declaration, just like the Northern Declaration, hopefully is organic. It's coming from you, and it really is about guidelines that should be helpful in how we think with each other, how we talk with each other, how we communicate with each other, so that we can reap theosophical fruit with each other that's productive in our work. So again, it's nothing that's being set in stone as a must-do. You don't have to follow it, you don't have to believe it, but it's more flexible and existing as guidelines to help us walk through that path. So, opened up to you. You have one. Okay. Questions or thoughts or contributions? Oh, John? Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
So just a thought. The world is superficially diverse and fundamentally unified. So if we want to go in the direction of unity and brotherhood, we have to go to subtler levels of consciousness. And the experience of that brotherhood will generate the reality of brotherhood.
Okay, thank you. Experiential encounter with truth. If we all have it, there's nothing to say, and we just resonate with each other. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a practical point also in view of the study circles. We have already in our booklet the Naarden Declaration, so there is already some kind of basis. So I assume that, you know, we can have a look at that, but from our study circles we can try to add ideas to this Naarden Declaration, or do we start with a blank sheet, so to speak, to draft the Philadelphia Declaration? Are there any ideas about this?
You definitely had some ideas about that.
Way. If you read the Naarden Declaration and the purposes, I think they are quite good text. But what we like to see is, can we extend this? Yeah, so maybe more in the practical direction, for instance. So we don't look for another, let's say, 10 pages of additional text, maybe just a few lines, but very, let's say, Buddhic, very principled lines, what can be as guideline. Yeah. For me, if I read the purposes and the Naarden Declarations, it helped me in my thinking, what is the direction of our study? What is the need of working together? And we can apply that easily in our own, let's say, stream. But I think we like to see it much wider. Yeah?
Well, I don't know if you have room for this, but I would like to see something about the recognition of diversity. Now, we already talk about diversity of viewpoints and, you know, listening to others, but I think it should be on record that, given particularly what's happening in this country, that diversity of all the usual things, race, gender, class, all of that, Theosophy is inclusive. That kind of message needs to be of record. And also the importance of each individual being a kind of authority, so, which is in the pamphlet Theosophy Simply Stated. So those are some suggestions, but I think it's a good time to mention something about the toleration of diversity, particularly of religion.
And just to piggyback on that point, because it also brings me back to the initial point that was made, there's the article that HPB wrote, the Beacon Light of Truth, or there's a slightly different phrasing of that. But in that article, I think in the 4th or the 5th subdivision of that, she speaks about the necessity of the 7 rays in terms of diversity, in terms of difference. And what she says is that if those 7 rays, as represented in humanity, although she was speaking about it in a different context, are represented, then we represent the full spectrum of the hierarchy of truth. So to the point of diversity, it is important that we speak, that we take into account those points of views, those different levels of developmental experience, so that we can capture a whole truth. And in that, we can appreciate communicating with others. Two ladies.
So speaking of diversity and kind of building on some of Herman's comments this morning, it seems important to me to be able to translate the principles of Theosophy that are dear to me into practical application in terms of brotherhood and diversity. So one way I think we can try to transform that in ourselves is through an opportunity in the next few days to be together and to share our experiences about our own interests and perspectives of the Theosophy, and for us to actually just carefully, with some love in our hearts, listen to each other. And that doesn't mean we have to agree with each other, but it means we have to be open and kind of recognize in ourselves when our own prejudices start to come up. And that's what you're meaning, I think, by your self-reflection, to understand within ourselves what is it that causes barriers for us in understanding somebody else's diverse point of view. So it's a real opportunity for us to practice. How do we actually treat each other in a brotherly way? We may know it in our head, but how can we transform it in our heart? And I think that's what this great opportunity to be together is about.
Of the 7 rays. The 7 rays that you mentioned, well, those 7 rays are actually in each human being because they constitute the 7 principles of our being. So it is the expression of it that is different in each one, because you gave a talk some years ago about the mind being the lower and the higher, and those people who express the lower mind, which is personal and pulls it towards the earth, have different viewpoints than those who act perhaps more altruistically, thinking with the higher mind. Those opportunities are available to every human being, though, because we are all made of the same principles. It's the expression that is different.
Then looking forward to a great interaction. This is hopefully energizing everyone to express their principles in action.
But I think the challenge in this point of view is not to say what we don't want to be, but to say what we have to be. If you speak about we should not do this and not do that, is not for me, a very positive construction. So you should say, what is then the real attitude we should have between each other? What is what we have to emit in the society so that people will recognize us as something, hey, that is an interest person, that is something I have to speak with. Where is his point of view, his life view coming from? Yeah?
One thing that is very important, I think, is that we should be nice for each other and friendly, of course, but that we have to take each other seriously. And brotherhood, in my point of view, is that we consider the other as a human being which is fully able to understand everything what the other person is saying. And if we don't want to talk about subjects because we think that the other is not ripe for it, or that the other person may feel a little bit offended because of it, that's not brotherhood. Brotherhood is when you say each other the truth, of course in a friendly way, to reach a higher truth. Yeah? That just want to add that, yeah?
I hope this is helpful. I was thinking if we could put ourselves in HPB's shoes. When she started, there were no streams. There was nothing. And I think I proposed that we try to imagine what that would be like. And so HPB and the Mahatmas emphasized that it was not about them personally. It was the message that was important. So the personality part of it, and they probably knew what was going to come down the line. And so a nucleus, in a sense, we're rekindling that vision that she was connecting to. You know, I don't think she would want people to parrot the secret doctrine. And, you know, if we do that, if we just keep parroting the words, we don't get to understanding, we don't get to activation, we don't use it. Like Herman said, we have to experiment with it and make it real to ourselves in our own words, in our own feelings. But we're here to do much more than just parrot and reflect that we're here to act the way that she acted.
We've got a few more minutes. Let me just throw this out as a teaser. What would it be like if we were in our study circles and every time someone spoke, instead of looking at them and seeing them as separate with a face and emotional tones, we closed our eyes and just thought of ourselves as having that thought? How would that impact communication? So that there's only one mind, and everyone, because it was an interesting thought. Herman was talking, and I lost my mind for another moment, and I realized that we probably are all thinking right now the same thing. But when we talk, how many things can we express at one time? One thing. And when someone expresses one thing because the other person thought of that, but the other side of that the one couldn't express, then they counter that thought as if it were different. And so we end up in this dance that sometimes turns into an argument. But what happens if we just think that this is a thought arising in my mind and there are other thoughts to follow? It would change, perhaps, the nature of the communication. So as we're trying to figure out what to put in the declaration, again, it's not that one may be necessarily right or wrong, but they're expressing a piece of something that is part of something else. Some folks would call that part of the holonic progression, or one word in a sentence. But think about it, we're all putting together a guideline as a declaration, which is 3 or 4 paragraphs, and each of us has a word. And then we just have to structure the sentences so that the meaning comes out. Different kind of conversation, different kind of communication. We've got 8 minutes. Any questions left about the declaration or the, do we have?
William Quan Judge mentioned that the object of the Theosophical movement was to raise the manas and buddhi of the race. So those are like the development of the intuitive and cognitive capacities of human beings. And that elevation really takes place, I believe, on an individual basis. So I don't know how you would express that exactly, but the idea is to arouse and develop the higher faculties of the human beings. That's real spirituality, and that's the difference between head learning and soul wisdom, are those faculties. So I don't know how you incorporate that, but I just wanted to highlight that that seems to be an important factor in what all theosophical endeavors are involved with.
I was just wondering, are we writing the declaration, who the audience is here? Who is the audience? Are we writing the declaration for ourselves, or are we writing it for somebody else? If it's for somebody else, maybe we can teach something, collectively speaking. If it's for ourselves, you know, I mean, are we inflating our ego, or are we just reinstating something we already know? The point is, once we know the audience, once we know what message we want to give and to whom we need to give it, then we may better accurately compose the message.
Well, I think that is a good question. If you see what our purposes are, I think that for me it is clear that it is not for ourselves, yeah, but that we try to be something in the theosophical mainstreams to get a better, let's say, cooperation. Cooperation in the meaning that we understand each other better, we understand the Theosophy better, and we are more able to bring the Theosophy, the Theosophy to the people, let's call it, out there. My point of view is, and that was always a very important aspect for myself, if you see all the problems the world is having on the moment, all the answers you can easily find, yeah? What is the reason that we don't have that answers out? If you look in our country, in the Netherlands, on the moment there are very big issues about end of life. Yeah? Is my life fulfilled? Is it over? Yeah? Some people start thinking already on 55 or even younger and say, life has nothing to do for me. And that is a big issue. And so we say, that is strange. If you are in that age, you should have a different view of life. You should more thinking about, let's say, in Buddhic aspects, in moral and ethical things. Try to develop truth for yourself. That is one of the beauties on the end of life. You have more time, maybe you have a reasonable pension, so you can spend your time more much on the subject. And that people comes to the conclusion, okay, my life is over. And I like to end it. And I think, and that is what we are really doing, Theosophy gives a good answer on it. In May, last May 2021, we had a symposium special on things like depression. Depression is in the Netherlands, 1 out of 5 persons has a depression, or is in a depression, or had a depression. So we were, from theosophical point of view, bringing out the knowledge and how you can avoid that, and what you should do if you are in it, and so on. Yeah. So I think this is the things we have to do. If we are able to do that as a cooperation between the mainstreams, we are much more efficient. Yeah. You have a much wider, let's say, public, what we can address. So if we are able to build up a better understanding between the traditions and a better cooperation between the traditions based on the original ideas, I think we are much more efficient. Simple as that. Yeah.
You also have a wider audience you can influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, another simple thought. If we just think about everyone that is truly entrenched in theosophical thought and has made it to some degree a living power in their life, and you think about what their vocation is in the world, and you think about all of these different people theosophically coming together, then you have to ask the question, what part of the world don't we represent? What part of the world, as Herman was saying in terms of, let's say, depression, cannot be reached by theosophical principles and ideas? What stops us is that we don't trust, we don't believe, we don't think everybody else has got it right, and so we want to hold it to ourselves, we want to be elite, etc., as opposed to having this conversation, breaking down barriers, again, not necessarily taking on the belief of another, but simply learning how to work through those superficial obstacles that prevent us from being a power in the world that benefits humanity. It's really that simple. And to the idea of Buddhimanas, we can't get to Buddhimanas unless we realize that the clouds that we call personality that dissipate in the sunlight really don't exist. And that's as easy as it is to say, it is the greatest stumbling block that exists. Because we're locked in this, we think this is us. We think these are our thoughts. They're unique. They're very special. Until we talk. And we find out that, gosh, there's nothing that I thought of that you didn't say, and you don't already know. And eventually we begin to evaporate and realize that there's nothing left but us. And so again, if we could, as Theosophists, representing the different vocations in the world, the different ways of seeing, the different levels of development in the world, simply come together and have a good communication and roll that force out, what would stop it? Nothing. Very simple thought, but an amazing thought.
Close by, thank you. Maybe to get back to your question, Joe, because I was thinking about it while you were asking it. I think for me the Naarden Declaration is rather abstract and gives an answer to the question, why should we meet every year? What is the meaning of ITC? But it's still abstract. And I think what we want to do this week, but correct me if I'm wrong, is we want to make it one step more concrete. So it's the how question. How are we going to do that? In John's words, that would be our marching orders to ourselves. So when we meet, how do we do that? But not just that, it's also for the other theosophical, let's say, units out there that haven't been here yet. There's a lot of misunderstanding. So maybe we can clarify some stuff by writing a declaration. And the third step is, if we want to be a nucleus, and if we want to send out a message out there, it's not just for Theosophists, but basically for everybody. How can we live as brethren together?
I don't want to be too confusing here, but being that you're speaking about declaration, so I'm saying that you're talking about declaring something. And if you were speaking about like minds, right? So if you're declaring something with a like mind, it got to be, as the gentleman said, to what audience? And how powerful is this declaration going to be? Because as Theosophists, if what we hold to be true and what we hold to have power, then you must declare it out into an audience, whether as a teacher or as an open invitation as learners. So therefore, there's many people that declare things, but like we in Philadelphia, and we know about America and what happened in Philadelphia. So now we here again making a declaration, but will it have the power to bring about a change with those that say this is this way and those that say this is that way? But we say there's no higher truth but the truth. You understand? So our like minds, as I'm sitting here, have to be harnessed and put into a language as a declaration, and then definitely stated out, you understand, as an invitation or as, you know, for lack of words, challenge or contestant to what exists and is not evolving the brotherhood of humanity.
Well, well, I must say you have quite a number of, I think, good points in it. And well, I'm personally quite looking forward to what happens this evening, so we can learn from a process from, what is it, a few hundred years ago, where you were building up one of the most important constitutions and the whole, let's say, forces and ideas behind it. Yeah. And if we can learn from that and we can come to a type of motivation and type of text what help us to be more efficient in spreading Theosophy, I think it should be very welcome. Yeah.